In a world filled with noise, distraction, and constant motion, silence often appears weak, passive, or even empty. Yet, silence carries a strength that words cannot express, a power that movement cannot display, and a depth that noise can never reach. Silence is not an absence, it is a presence. It is the stillness beneath the storm, the calm that steadies the restless mind, and the quiet foundation that gives rise to clarity, wisdom, and true strength. To understand silence is to understand one of the most profound forces available to the human spirit. Silence is the training ground of discipline. In silence, the mind confronts itself without escape, without distraction, without the comfort of external noise to hide behind. Many fear silence because within it lies the mirror of their own thoughts, and in that reflection, truths arise that may be uncomfortable or inconvenient. But when silence is embraced instead of avoided, it becomes a tool for refining the inner self. In the absence of chatter, the mind learns to order itself. Discipline takes root not in the midst of chaos, but in the steady rhythm of inner quiet. Through silence, the mind learns restraint, patience, and the ability to act with precision rather than reaction. Silence also reveals strength because it creates space for awareness. When one no longer feels the compulsion to respond immediately, to fill every pause with words, or to justify every action with explanations, a new kind of power emerges. This power is rooted in presence. To listen without the need to reply, to observe without the urge to interfere, to witness without judgment. These are signs of great strength. The person who can remain silent when provoked demonstrates mastery over impulse. The person who can hold silence when others demand noise shows resilience in the face of pressure. Awareness blossoms not in the flood of constant expression, but in the openness that silence provides. In silence, energy gathers rather than scatters. Every spoken word is an expenditure of energy. Every reaction, every unnecessary explanation, every attempt to prove something drains the reservoir of inner power. Silence reverses this process. It conserves energy, redirects it inward, and refines it. Like water pooling in stillness before it becomes a powerful current, silence collects strength within the self. What appears as inactivity is actually the preparation of great force. Just as a bow must be drawn back in quiet tension before the arrow is released, silence is the drawing back of energy, storing potential until the right moment for action arrives. Silence also teaches humility. In the practice of silence, one discovers the limits of one's own understanding. Without the crutch of constant speaking, without the need to project opinions into every space, the awareness of how much there is yet to learn becomes evident. Humility grows not from declaring what is known, but from recognizing how vast the unknown remains. Silence allows wisdom to enter because the ego is not filling the space with self-importance. A silent mind is a receptive mind, and receptivity is the doorway through which knowledge flows. Strength is often misunderstood as loudness, dominance, or force. But true strength is quiet because it does not need to prove itself. The mountain does not shout its presence, yet it towers above the earth. The ocean does not scream its depth, yet its vastness cannot be measured. The tree does not announce its growth, yet it rises from seed to sky in silence. Nature displays its greatest powers not in noise but in quiet endurance, in stillness, in silent transformation. To embody silence is to embody this natural strength that does not clamor for recognition but simply exists in unshakable presence. Silence is also a form of protection. Words, once spoken, cannot be taken back. Actions driven by noise often lead to regret. Silence creates a shield, a pause, a space between thought and response. In this space, wisdom can arise, clarity can surface, and unnecessary harm can be avoided. The strength of silence is the strength of choosing when to speak, when to act, and when to withhold. It is the strength of knowing that not every battle requires engagement, not every opinion requires a reply, and not every conflict deserves attention. Silence protects energy, guards dignity, and preserves inner peace. Silence deepens connection with the self and with the world. In the absence of noise, the rhythm of the breath becomes audible. The beat of the heart becomes felt. The subtle movement of thought becomes visible. In silence, one begins to hear the unspoken language of existence, the whispers of intuition, the flow of energy, the quiet harmony of life. This connection cannot be found in endless distraction or constant noise. It arises only when silence is cultivated, when the mind becomes still enough to perceive what was always present but unnoticed. The strength of silence lies not in avoidance but in mastery. It is not the silence of suppression. where words are swallowed out of fear. It is not the silence of weakness, where one is too timid to speak. It is the silence of choice, where words are measured, energy is conserved, and presence is valued above performance. Such silence is not emptiness but fullness. It is not weakness but power. It is not absence but essence. To discover silence is to discover that strength need not shout, need not prove, need not demand. It simply is, and in that being, it transforms everything around it. When we look outward, the world appears full of distractions, endless noise, and demands that pull us in many directions at once. Yet the greatest discoveries, the deepest transformations, and the truest clarity are not found outside, but within. To focus within is to return to the source from which all experiences arise. It is to step away from the chaos of appearances and return to the silent center of one's being, where strength and wisdom reside quietly, waiting to be seen. The mind is like a mirror that constantly reflects the images of the world. If that mirror is fogged by distraction, comparison, or constant stimulation, then everything reflected appears distorted. But when attention is turned inward, when the dust is wiped away, what shines back is pure awareness itself. That awareness is not shaken by praise or criticism, not lost in gain or loss, not weakened by the passage of time. To focus within is to begin polishing that mirror until the inner clarity becomes so sharp that outer disturbances no longer control one's state of being. Distraction has become one of the greatest obstacles of modern life. Every moment, there is something pulling attention outward: messages, screens, conversations, obligations. These things are not wrong in themselves, but the attachment to them creates a restless mind that forgets its own depth. By turning within, one recognizes that the source of peace is not dependent on what happens externally. Peace is cultivated like a flame inside a protected lantern. No matter how strong the winds outside, if the flame is cared for within, it continues to burn steadily. The practice of focusing within requires discipline. It is not simply closing the eyes, it is withdrawing the energy that constantly flows outwards and allowing it to return home. When this happens, the senses become sharper, not duller. The breath becomes deeper, not forced. Thoughts become lighter, not suppressed. Slowly, a natural balance appears, and from that balance, one begins to see life with a new perspective. Problems that once seemed overwhelming lose their power, because the mind is no longer entangled with them. Instead, it rests in a place of stability, like a mountain that does not move with the wind. Focusing within is not about escaping the world. It is about gaining the clarity to engage with it more consciously. When energy is always leaking outward, the individual becomes drained, exhausted, and reactive. But when that same energy is gathered inward, it transforms into vitality, creativity, and strength. From the outside, it may look like stillness. On the inside, it feels like a deep reservoir filling with pure energy. This reservoir becomes the foundation from which actions are taken. Decisions are no longer rushed or influenced by fear, but guided by clarity and inner conviction. In many traditions, this inward focus is called returning to the center. The center is not somewhere far away. It is the natural state of being that has been buried under layers of noise. To uncover it, one must first become willing to sit in silence, even when silence feels uncomfortable. At first, the mind resists because it is addicted to movement and stimulation, but with patience, the restlessness begins to settle. Like muddy water left undisturbed, the mind becomes clear. In that clarity, one discovers that peace was never absent, it was only hidden beneath the turbulence of thoughts. To focus within is also to recognize the patterns of one's own mind. When attention is inward, the repetitive thoughts, the habitual reactions, the subtle fears all become visible. Without this focus, these patterns control behavior unconsciously. With focus, they are seen for what they are, passing clouds in the sky of awareness. The act of observing them without judgment weakens their hold. Gradually, the mind becomes lighter and freedom begins to take root. Every human being carries within themselves a space of silence, but few visit it. This space is not created by effort. It is revealed when unnecessary clutter is removed. Just as light enters a room when curtains are drawn, peace enters awareness when attention is withdrawn from endless outward chasing. The more often one visits this inner space, the more natural it becomes to live from it. And from that inner space, actions take on a different quality. They are not rushed or scattered. They are precise, powerful, and purposeful. Inward focus also deepens the connection with life itself. When attention is not scattered outward, one becomes more sensitive to subtle experiences, the rhythm of breath, the stillness between thoughts, the quiet presence that holds all moments. This sensitivity is not weakness, it is strength, for it allows one to live with greater awareness of the present. The present moment is the only true ground of life, yet most are carried away by past regrets or future worries. Focusing within anchors the being in the now, where clarity and power naturally reside. Discipline, patience, and sincerity are the pillars of this inner focus. Without discipline, the mind will constantly drift outward. Without patience, the silence will not have time to unfold. Without sincerity, the practice becomes mechanical, and the deeper essence remains untouched. When these three qualities are cultivated, the inward journey becomes not only possible, but deeply fulfilling. It reveals that the answers sought outside were always resting quietly within. To focus within is not a single act, but a continuous practice. It is the art of returning again and again to the center, no matter how many times attention drifts away. With every return, the connection with inner stillness grows stronger. With every return, the external world loses some of its power to disturb. With every return, one becomes more rooted in the strength of silence, more aligned with the essence of life itself, and more capable of living with authenticity and clarity. In the natural world, energy is never truly lost, it only changes its form. The sun gives light, which nourishes plants, which then feed animals, which in turn support human life. This chain continues endlessly, proving that energy, once created, does not disappear. The same principle applies to the human being. Every thought, every movement, every word spoken, and every emotion expressed consumes energy. To live without awareness of how this energy is spent is to move through life like a leaking vessel, where what is precious is constantly escaping without notice. Energy conservation is therefore not only a physical principle but also a spiritual discipline. Consider the way most people live. From the moment they wake up, their attention is scattered. The mind is pulled in multiple directions toward worries of yesterday, plans of tomorrow, and distractions of the present moment. Each of these directions demands energy. The body follows the mind, and the result is exhaustion before the day has truly begun. If you were to observe carefully, you would see that much of human fatigue does not come from physical labor, but from the endless expenditure of mental energy. The racing of thoughts, the replaying of scenarios, the holding onto regrets or fears, these drain more vitality than hours of physical work ever could. Energy conservation begins with awareness. It requires the realization that your inner energy is not infinite, and what is wasted cannot be retrieved. Imagine holding a container of water while walking through a dry desert. If the container leaks, the water vanishes drop by drop. By the time you need it most, nothing remains. So it is with energy. The leaks are subtle and unnecessary arguments, indulgence in gossip, constant comparison, dwelling in resentment, or pursuing trivial desires. Each of these is like a hole in the container. To conserve energy is to recognize these leaks and to seal them through discipline. Stillness is one of the greatest tools for energy conservation. When the body is still, the heart rate lowers, the breath deepens, and the mind begins to quiet. This stillness is not laziness, it is conscious rest. The ancient traditions understood the power of meditation for this very reason. To sit in silence, not chasing thoughts, not forcing them away, but simply observing, allows the mind to cease scattering energy. The energy that is usually lost in endless thinking is now contained within. Slowly, the scattered drops gather into a reservoir. From this reservoir comes clarity, strength, and resilience. Equally important is the conservation of emotional energy. Emotions, when uncontrolled, consume immense amounts of power. Anger, for instance, rises quickly, burns fiercely, and leaves behind exhaustion. Fear creates tension in the body, and the constant state of vigilance drains vitality. Even excessive joy, if dependent on outer circumstances, can lead to imbalance. Energy conservation does not mean suppressing emotions, it means transforming them. When anger arises, the disciplined individual redirects it into focused action rather than destructive outburst. When fear appears, it becomes fuel for preparation and awareness rather than paralysis. Emotional energy, when conserved and transformed, becomes a source of wisdom. Another aspect often ignored is the conservation of energy through speech. Words carry power. To speak carelessly, to argue endlessly, or to engage in idle chatter is to leak energy without purpose. Observe how drained you feel after a long session of meaningless talk. The voice grows tired, the mind becomes dull, and the spirit feels depleted. But when speech is measured, intentional, and aligned with truth, words themselves become energy, giving rather than energy draining. Silence, therefore, is not emptiness, it is conservation. To learn when not to speak is as powerful as knowing the right words to say. The body too demands careful energy management. Overindulgence in food, lack of rest, or absence of movement all lead to imbalance. Energy conservation in the body means giving it what it needs, not what it craves. Rest must be sufficient but not excessive. Food must be nourishing, not merely pleasurable. Movement must be consistent, not occasional. When the body is cared for in this way, energy flows without obstruction, and the mind benefits from this harmony. Relationships also play a role in energy conservation. Some connections uplift, strengthen, and inspire, while others drain, burden, and deplete. To conserve energy, one must learn to set boundaries without hostility. It is not rejection but self-preservation. Just as a tree grows stronger by receiving adequate sunlight and water, so too does a human being thrive in an environment that does not constantly strip away inner resources. Energy conservation does not lead to passivity, it leads to power. The energy saved from waste is redirected toward growth, creativity, and purpose. A person who conserves energy becomes like a river contained within its banks. Instead of spilling out in all directions, the flow becomes powerful, capable of carving valleys and moving mountains. This contained energy manifests as presence. When such a person enters a room, others feel their strength without a single word being spoken. At its deepest level, energy conservation is about alignment with the natural rhythm of life. The universe itself is efficient. Planets orbit with precision, rivers flow along their course, seasons change without resistance. Nothing is wasted. When a person learns to mirror this natural efficiency, life ceases to feel like a struggle. Energy is no longer lost in resistance, but conserved through acceptance. This does not mean surrendering to passivity, but rather moving with the flow of reality instead of against it. When you look at the natural world, you see patterns that are ancient and unbroken. The rising of the sun, the flowing of rivers, the growth of trees, the shifting of seasons, all of them move in cycles. Nothing in nature rushes, and yet everything is accomplished. Alignment with nature is not about trying to control these cycles, but about recognizing that you are part of them. Modern life often pulls human beings away from this awareness, creating an illusion that we are separate from the earth, from the air, from the waters, and from the quiet rhythm of existence. But the truth is that we are never apart. The body is made of the same elements as the soil, the bones are as strong as stone. The breath is air moving through, and the blood flows like rivers carrying life within. To align with nature means to live in harmony with this understanding and to practice returning to it again and again. When misalignment occurs, it shows itself in restlessness, confusion, and exhaustion. You may find yourself chasing after goals that feel hollow or holding on to desires that do not nourish the soul. This is the condition of forgetting that nature has its own timing. A tree does not bear fruit in winter because it is not the season. A river does not resist the mountains it must carve through, it simply flows. In the same way, when you resist the natural rhythm of your life, you create friction inside. To align with nature is to accept the seasons of your own being. There will be times for growth, times for rest, times for shedding, and times for renewal. Just as the earth carries winter, spring, summer, and autumn, so too does the human spirit move through its own cycles. The breath is one of the simplest teachers of alignment. Every inhalation is expansion, every exhalation is release. Without forcing, without clinging, the breath comes and goes, showing you balance in its most basic form. If you observe it closely, you notice that alignment is not about holding onto the inhale or the exhale. It is about allowing both to move naturally. Life itself is mirrored in this rhythm, a constant cycle of receiving and letting go. The one who tries to control the breath will quickly feel tension. But the one who surrenders to its flow learns that power arises from harmony, not from force. When you align with nature, you begin to recognize that strength is not always about hardness. Look at water. It is soft and yielding, yet it wears down stone. Look at the bamboo. It bends with the wind, and because it bends, it does not break. Alignment teaches that resistance is not the same as resilience. True resilience is the ability to remain flexible while staying rooted, to adapt without losing your center. Nature shows you this over and over, if only you are willing to observe. The mind, however, often interrupts this alignment. It creates noise, comparisons, judgments, and attachments. The mind wants to be ahead of the moment, always grasping for what comes next. But the natural world does not think this way. The tree does not compare itself to another tree. The flower does not rush to bloom before its time. When you realign your mind with nature, you learn to trust timing. You learn patience. You learn presence. These qualities bring clarity because the noise of wanting and fearing begins to dissolve, and in its place arises acceptance of what is. The body too must come back into alignment. Many people live disconnected from the signals of their own body. They eat without awareness, move without care, and rest without true rest. Nature teaches that every creature follows its instinct with balance. Birds migrate when the season calls them, not because of schedules on paper. Animals rest when tired, not when the clock allows. Alignment with nature means to listen again to the body's wisdom, the need for nourishment, for movement, for stillness, for sleep. To ignore these signals is to step further away from harmony, but to honor them is to restore connection with the natural order. Silence is also a form of alignment. In the natural world, silence is not empty, it is full. The silence of a forest holds countless lives moving in quiet coordination. The silence of the night sky holds stars, planets, and the vastness of the cosmos. When you sit in silence, you begin to sense the same fullness within yourself. In that stillness, the chatter of the mind settles, and what remains is the rhythm of life itself pulsing quietly inside you. Silence is the language of alignment, a reminder that not everything must be spoken, and not everything requires explanation. Alignment with nature is not only personal, it extends outward into how you live on the earth. To take more than needed, to exploit without respect, is to live out of balance. Nature responds to imbalance with storms, droughts, and disruptions. In the same way, when a person takes without giving, when one clings without releasing, inner storms appear. To align with nature is to practice reciprocity, to give as much as you take, to respect the balance of all life, to see yourself as part of a whole instead of separate from it. The deeper you move into alignment, the more you see that simplicity is not a limitation, but a liberation. Nature never complicates itself. A tree grows upward, a river moves downward, the sun rises and sets. Complexity arises when the mind resists this simplicity. By aligning with nature, you are reminded that what you truly need is often far less than what you think you want. Peace does not come from accumulation, but from alignment, from being where you are supposed to be, moving with the rhythm that was always guiding you. The path to growth, transformation, and true fulfillment begins not with the world outside, but with the one within. When people set their eyes on achievement, they often rush to conquer external goals, acquire material success, or seek validation from others. Yet the one who has not mastered himself will always remain a prisoner, regardless of how much he accumulates, how far he travels, or how many victories he claims in the outer world. Self-mastery comes first because without it, everything else is unstable. It is like building a house on sand. No matter how beautiful the structure looks, it will eventually collapse under its own weight. To master oneself is not a single act, but an ongoing discipline. It begins with awareness. Many people move through life unconsciously, repeating patterns of thought and behavior that do not serve them. They act out of habit, react from impulse, and allow emotions to drag them like waves pulling a small boat. Self-mastery requires pausing, noticing, and recognizing what arises within. Anger, fear, doubt, desire, all of these are natural forces of the human condition. But when left unchecked, they control the direction of life. Awareness is the first tool to reclaim the reins. The next stage is discipline. Discipline is often misunderstood as restriction or suppression, but in truth it is freedom. A person without discipline is as a servant to urges, to distractions, to whatever temptation happens to appear. But discipline creates space. It strengthens the mind to act deliberately instead of compulsively. Just as a martial artist trains his body to move with precision, one must train the mind and emotions to act with clarity. Self-mastery is the art of choosing one's response rather than being dragged by reaction. Another essential aspect of self-mastery is the relationship with the body. The body is the vessel through which life is experienced, yet it is often neglected or misused. To master the self, one must learn to care for the body with respect, to cultivate strength, balance, and vitality. The Shaolin tradition teaches that the body and mind are not separate, They reflect and influence each other continuously. A restless mind will often create a restless body. A weak body will often cloud the clarity of the mind. Self-mastery requires harmony between the two, a daily practice of movement, breathing, and stillness. Emotional mastery is equally important. Emotions are energy in motion, and like fire, they can either illuminate or destroy. A person ruled by uncontrolled anger burns bridges, damages relationships, and creates suffering. A person drowned in fear never steps into his true potential. To master emotion does not mean to suppress it, but to understand it. When anger arises, it must be recognized, acknowledged, and transformed into constructive strength. When sadness arises, it can be allowed as a teacher of compassion. Every emotion has its place, but self-mastery gives the power to channel them instead of being consumed by them. Thought is another domain where mastery is necessary. The mind produces thoughts endlessly, most of them repetitive and unconscious. Without discipline, thoughts can trap a person in cycles of worry, comparison, or self-doubt. To master thought means to cultivate clarity, to direct the focus toward what truly matters, and to develop the ability to silence unnecessary noise. Meditation is one path, but meditation is not confined to sitting still with eyes closed. It is the art of bringing presence into every action, of noticing when the mind drifts and gently guiding it back. Self-mastery turns thought into a tool rather than a tormentor. Desire is perhaps the most subtle force to master. Desire itself is not wrong. It propels life forward, fuels ambition, and gives direction. But uncontrolled desire leads to endless craving, and craving leads to suffering. The person who is mastered by desire will always be restless, always chasing something outside himself, never satisfied. True self-mastery brings discernment to recognize which desires elevate and which ones enslave, to move with purpose instead of impulse, to enjoy without attachment, to act without being bound by the outcome. Self-mastery also involves alignment with values. Many live by borrowed values, doing what society expects or what others demand, without ever asking what is true to their own being. To master oneself means to live authentically, guided by principles that resonate deeply. It requires honesty, the courage to look inward and ask, am I living in harmony with what I claim to believe? When actions align with values, there is integrity, and integrity is a pillar of self-mastery. The journey of self-mastery is demanding because it requires turning inward, facing shadows, and breaking habits. It demands patience because change does not happen overnight. It requires humility because the ego resists being questioned, yet the rewards are profound. The one who has mastered himself moves with calm even in chaos, remains centered even in storms, and radiates strength that no external circumstance can shake. This kind of presence inspires others without a single word spoken. It is the presence of someone who is free, not because the world bends to him, but because he bends himself into alignment with truth. In the end, every achievement, every success, and every transformation flows from this foundation. Before you can lead others, you must lead yourself. Before you can conquer challenges, you must conquer your impulses. Before you can shape the world outside, you must shape the world inside. Self-mastery is the root, and from this root, all branches of growth emerge. When self-mastery comes first, everything else that follows rests on solid ground. Unshakable and enduring power is one of the most misunderstood forces in human life. When people hear the word power, the mind often jumps to images of domination, control, or influence over others. Power is mistaken for something external, something that can be taken, seized, or measured by how much one can bend the will of others. Yet true power has little to do with such force. It is a paradox precisely because the more one clings to external displays of strength, the further one moves away from the real essence of it. The paradox of power is that it becomes greater when it is less concerned with possession, greater when it is not imposed, greater when it flows without resistance. In seeking power, many exhaust themselves. They accumulate wealth, pursue status, or chase recognition, believing that these acquisitions make them stronger. But such forms of power are brittle. They can be taken away, they shift with the moods of society, they vanish as quickly as they appear. To rely on these is to build one's strength on sand, for they demand constant reinforcement and protection. The paradox is that the stronger one tries to appear through these means, the more fragile one becomes. The effort to maintain appearances creates tension, and tension drains energy rather than preserves it. True power is quiet, steady, and often invisible. It is not announced with noise, nor does it demand attention. It resides in self-mastery, the ability to govern one's mind, emotions, and actions regardless of the circumstances outside. A person who has cultivated this kind of inner strength cannot be easily disturbed, cannot be manipulated by praise or insult, cannot be moved from their center. To the outside world, such a person may not appear powerful in the conventional sense, yet they hold a force that is unshakable. Here lies the paradox: the less one tries to control others, the more control one gains over oneself, and this self-control radiates as authentic strength. The paradox deepens when we look at the relationship between vulnerability and power. Conventional thought equates vulnerability with weakness. To admit uncertainty, to reveal emotions, to accept not knowing, these are often seen as shortcomings. But vulnerability is not the absence of power, it is the doorway to it. When one allows space for vulnerability, one becomes free of the fear of being exposed. That freedom transforms into resilience. Power is not about shielding oneself behind walls. It is about being so aligned with truth that no wall is necessary, to stand open, unguarded, and still remain unshaken. This is a higher form of strength than any armor can provide. Consider also the paradox between force and influence. Force seeks to compel. It uses pressure, threats, or manipulation to achieve compliance. Influence, on the other hand, arises from authenticity and presence. A person who has cultivated genuine power does not need to force others to listen, for their presence itself carries weight. Their words resonate not because of volume, but because of alignment with inner clarity. The paradox is that those who shout the loudest are rarely heard deeply, while those who speak softly from a place of centeredness can move mountains in silence. Another aspect of this paradox lies in surrender. Surrender is often mistaken for defeat, for giving up, for losing. Yet surrender in its truest form is the release of resistance to life. When one stops struggling against what is, energy is conserved. That energy then transforms into awareness, into strength that is calm rather than frantic. The paradox is that surrender, instead of diminishing power, becomes the source of it. By yielding, one does not lose, one allows a deeper current of strength to carry them. A tree that refuses to bend in the storm will break, but the tree that sways remains standing long after the winds have passed. There is also the paradox of humility. The ego insists that to be powerful, one must be recognized, praised, and placed above others. But true humility does not shrink from greatness, nor does it seek to diminish oneself. It is the quiet confidence that needs no validation. In humility, power is preserved because it is not wasted in constant comparison or competition. A humble person does not lose strength by lifting others. Instead, their power expands in proportion to the strength they help awaken in those around them. The paradox is that in lowering oneself, one rises, and in serving others, one becomes greater. The paradox of power can even be seen in stillness versus action. The world often glorifies busyness, constant movement, endless striving. Yet stillness has a force that action alone cannot achieve. In stillness, one sees clearly, perceives patterns, and acts with precision rather than haste. One moment of clear action from stillness can accomplish more than days of restless activity. Power does not come from doing more, it comes from doing with alignment. The paradox is that by doing less, but with intention, one achieves more than by scattering energy across endless pursuits. At the heart of this paradox is the recognition that power is not a thing to be acquired, but a state to be realized. It emerges when fear dissolves, when ego loosens its grip, when one aligns with something greater than the self. Power does not cling, it flows, it does not demand, it resonates, it does not conquer, it harmonizes. And so, the paradox of power is that those who chase it never truly find it, while those who release the chase discover it was within them all along,